I'm gonna do this little talky, showy thingy. I don't know how to describe this.
Talky showy thing.
Talky, showy thingy. I can't give like a good description for what this is. Do you want to describe it to the people listening?
Yeah, I can. Am I on right now?
Yeah, you're on. You're live.
Okay, sweet. So basically what this is it's a group of, volunteers really that got together and decided to look at the science behind the science fiction. And we started off with StarCraft. I'm myself a paleontologist. My name is Panera, and we've got with us our physics major. He's, are you third year, Zappy, in physics? Sorry? Are you third year in physics?
Yes.
Yeah, and we also have we'd call him our media manager, Hades. So what we do is, using our various educational backgrounds, we actually look at, like, for example, if we're looking at a Protoss unit, kind of look at, how the cloak works on a Dark Templar, or how it could possibly work. And the fun thing about this is that anyone can really do it. You just need to have two eyes and be able to make observations. Power from, power from it comes when we add in some actual facts, things like, that I've learned in my days working as a paleontologist, and sort of brings to life this, say, like today we're going to talk about the swarm host, brings to life this unit in a way that just having this little animated thing on the screen doesn't really do justice to. And we cover other things. I think we've done, what else have we done? Half-Life 2.
And Warhammer.
We covered Warhammer.
And Aliens.
We covered the Xenomorphs.
Well, technically we didn't cover it just yet.
So we've been quite fortunate. In about a year ago, I worked with Nova War, and I worked with In Control a few times as well. And so now we're fortunate enough that Destiny is joining us and streaming the episode today. I think what we'll do is just sort of dive right into it and talk about, what's going on with the Swarm Host, because it's a really, really cool unit. What do you think, Destiny? What do you think about the Swarm Host when you see its unit design and the animations that you see with it, Destiny?
What do you mean? Like, what do I think about it? Like in a sense of how it can exist in the real world, or like how it works in gameplay wise, or? Well,
if this was a real animal, like let's say you're a Marine in the battlefield, for example, and you see a swarm host, what's going through your head when you see this creature?
I mean, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is its ability to like infinitely produce units that come out and attack. Would probably be a little bit strange, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's pretty much no secret that this thing was originally dreamt up when looking at pictures of what's called Pippa Pippa, which is, it's quite famous. It's that aquatic frog that has the bays on its back. There's a phobia that's associated with these little holes on the back of this frog. And so
I actually know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they had a name for it, I forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's some weird name, and there are people that legitimately have complained to Blizzard about their phobia with this unit. So they, I guess, goal accomplished, right? The problem comes, this creature, the way that it's spawning these little locusts doesn't really line up with what's actually going on with Pippa Pippa. So Pippa Pippa basically lays the eggs, then they get fertilized, and then the eggs are placed on the back, and then the eggs kind of are carried around on the skin. And this isn't what we're seeing as far as I know. And these are just observations I've made from playing the game and looking up lore and things like this. Basically, you're not seeing a system where something's coming along and fertilizing any Zerg unit, really. I mean, when you think of the Zerg, you don't really think of them laying eggs all over the map and doing it that way. It's more of a centralized hatchery structure.
Other than the queen, of course.
Like ants.
Yeah, so wow. So that brings me, they always rip on me for ants because I am a paleontologist, I do have an entomology background as well. And one of my favorites happens to be ants. And so where they come into this is ants have this really cool genetic, it's not really an ability, just genetic way about
thing.
Yeah, genetic way about them. It's called haplodiploidy. And if you're interested, I can give you guys more information. But for now, for the purposes of this, because honestly, this can get very complicated very fast and genetics is not my forte, we'll just point out that basically when you look at a queen ant, for example, a queen ant is... Sorry, someone just messaged me something retarded. Anyway, yes. Anyways, when you have a queen ant, basically she cannot if she's unfertilized, so if she hasn't, had a guy come along and knock her up, she can only produce males. And then when a male knocks her up, she can start producing females. So you get kind of this, what I think might be going on is a similar situation where the swarm host is a female, like I assume most Zerg units are, and the swarm host is able to produce males, so locusts. And I know they don't really look a whole lot alike, but there's some extreme examples of sexual dimorphism all around the world. Some good examples would be the lanternfish. That's probably one of the better ones, just to show how different they can look. You're all familiar with the lanternfish, I assume. It's this big kind of white-mouthed fish with the big scary teeth. So those things look rather badass. The females do. The males look like these little weird raisins, and they come and bite near the female's snatch and just kind of hang off there, fertilizing the female as they go. So there is some precedent for this. So that's what I'm thinking is going on. And where you get a control mechanism, which is very essential when you've got something like this. If you look at the axolotl, which is kind of a weird word. It's basically the sort of derpy-looking mudkip salamander guys with the gills that come off the sides. They're quite famous. You can find them in pet stores and all that jazz. Basically, they exist as juveniles their entire life, and the only way to make them turn into adults is to inject them with iodine straight into the thyroid. And it has to be a specific amount, and then they turn into adults and typically die not too long after. So I'm thinking that there's some sort of inhibitor involved with these locusts that are potentially the males of this species that imposes a control so that you don't get the locusts fertilizing the females. And the reason why that's important is because if you drop a bunch of swarm hosts that are able to make more swarm hosts, I'm sure the Terran and Protoss players in particular will...
I would love that.
I think it would be like auto win, right? And the problem is that once you take over a planet or a target area with these with swarm hosts that can make more swarm hosts, you'll run into the issue of what do you do with all of the excess swarm hosts? You have to feed them, you have to control them, you have to potentially cull them with your own resources, and that's sort of counterproductive. So I think that having an inhibitor placed on these creatures is important.
I'm sorry, are you saying that Zerg are not good at massing units? I'm sorry, I lost.
I'm saying that their potential, especially in this case to mass units that are actually free, is something that they would need to control potentially, because that can get away on them very quickly. Again, as I'm sure, I guess what's a good example? Any Protoss player turtling on two bases that just so happens to let a Zerg get up to flex spaces can attest. It's not a very pretty sight when the Zergs start to, have the production to back up this ridiculous amount of mining. And if there's no mining involved and no limits, then the swarm host suddenly starts wrecking everybody's face.
So this is what would you do if you could just make more swarm hosts with swarm hosts and they could make locusts as well?
I mean, obviously that'd be pretty fucking strong, I think.
I've seen you personally mass that amount and just thinking having it multiply exponentially. That's just like Zerg definition right there.
I think you hit your supply cap pretty quickly.
Yeah, probably. Swarm hosts are pretty strong too. If you could make a multiply early game, that'd probably be pretty crazy, I think.
Yeah, they did that in a campaign with the Banelings. There's just a splitter strain. Every time it dies, you make smaller ones. Jesus.
That was pretty ridiculous, wasn't it? So, someone you've actually probably seen Heart of the Swarm more than I have, and you've obviously done it on the professional level, either by competing or streaming or what have you. So, what would be the thing that you notice about just the swarm host in general for it moving around the map and its ability and its mobility or lack of mobility? You think, Destiny?
What do you mean, in regards to what? What do you mean by what do I notice about it?
Well, when let's say you're facing swarm hosts. What's the one thing that would you'd be able to exploit about it? And what's one of their strengths about their mobility or lack of mobility?
Zappy, if you say carriers, I swear to God.
Well, one of the most notable features of the swarm host is that it has to burrow in order for it to utilize its offense. So, obviously there's mobility problems there. If it has to get up and move, it's vulnerable anytime it's above ground. It takes time to burrow. So, typically whenever you play strategies against swarm hosts, you try to exploit the immobility of the unit and its vulnerability when it's unburrowed.
Okay.
How do you counter the fact that it spawns in waves? I've seen pro players burrow not just all swarm hosts at once, but just 1, 2, 3, so that way it's a continuous wave. Do you think it's harder to exploit that, or just it's just a little, little extra helping hand? It doesn't make a big difference. That's what I'm asking.
I mean, it kind of depends. You've got to take into account every individual situation. Say you were using them defensively and you never wanted to be attacked, then maybe you could burrow them in waves so that there'd be constant waves of Locust to keep your opponent busy so you would never be exposed. But say on the other hand, you were going on the offense. If you set them up so that they only attacked in waves, then you might run into an issue where the opponent always has enough firepower to clear them out before taking any damage. So in that case, you'd want to have them in one big wave so that you could be doing damage every attack, rather than having a steady stream of Locusts doing no damage, you know?
So it depends on DPS. If you have them in a conga line, like one circling at a time, then it's not a really big issue for the opponent. But if you send just massive waves at the same time, by the time they clear the Locust out, you already did so much damage.
Yeah, but conversely, if you're defending, if you send them in a massive line and the opponent gets around them, well, you're vulnerable for the entire time while you're waiting for the next set to spawn. So
it depends on DPS and offense defense sort of situation, right?
Yeah.
Think of a tide versus a tsunami. If you want to stop somebody from swimming out to the ocean, then you want a tide coming in that's pushing them back towards the shore. But if you want to knock over a city that's next to the ocean, you want a big tidal wave to come in and knock everything down. More or less like that.
Oh, okay.
So now, do you see Stormhost being like a pack animal working in unison? Like, hey guys, let's set it up so we spawn it in line versus let's just all do it at once.
Well, yeah, I mean, kind of due to the design of it, with the way you can either send them in waves in one big wave or a conga line. I mean, you need a certain number of swarm hosts to do that. That's why you see swarm hosts typically in big numbers instead of just like 2 or 3 of them at a time.
Yeah, they're rather benign if there's not a critical mass.
Yeah.
Yeah, like 3 or less is useless. 4 or more, that's pretty scary.
So as far as the pack question is concerned, I kind of feel that they don't really put a lot of resources into the swarm host themselves. It's not like a Zergling where, you see them and they're flowing, kind of like, it reminds me of in Jurassic Park 1, where they're looking at the Gallimimus herd, and you have the super paleontology guy, Alan Grant, looking like, oh, they're flocking just like birds, and they're kind of moving all, as one. And then, of course, the 2 little kids are like, yeah, but they're flocking towards us. Let's get the hell out of here. It's just what it reminds me of if you were to see, like, say, 50 Zerglings going across the map. It's more of a function, more of a unified group, whereas the Locusts themselves kind of fire at their own rate. They kind of derp in at their own rate. They kind of block each other off. And then they ultimately just kind of die. So it feels to me like they're not really putting a terrible amount of resources into them. And that could be because the swarm host itself only has, limited resources and has to kind of spread it out between all of these different generations of swarm hosts, or of Locust, rather.
Well, plus that, and Locust is meant to be not a permanent unit. It's just supposed to do its damage and then it's useless, whereas a swarm host has to endure and survive. So, which
brings me to an interesting point. The Locust itself, if you've ever zoomed in on the Locust, they've got they're basically a little missile launcher. So they're not really able to, I don't think, take in very much nutrients. I think they just kind of get given a set of, what are they called? Acid spines? What's the attack on them called?
1 second. Swarm host.
I'm pretty sure it's acid spines or so. Anyway, it's this little poke that shoots out of their mouth at high velocity. So that's a lot on such a little thing with such a big projectile. That's quite a bit of musculature and basically resources that the animal is using just to support this, rather than having, this whole elaborate, reproductive system or this elaborate digestive system, for example. They don't really do much other than what they do.
You can find, aren't there parallels to that in the insect world? If you're an entomologist, I mean, you know this better than I. Are there parallels to that where there are certain species of insects that only create, certain peoples within their hives that are only for fighting, and that's almost all they're good for? They don't do, I know like ants, like I'm pretty sure like the soldier ants don't have anything to do with reproduction or anything much beyond fighting, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at eusocial creatures in general. So, which is neat because eusocial just means that you're like one tier above what humans are for their social, where basically you're a super organism, right? All functioning, each individual functioning to serve the betterment of the hive, which is what we see in Zerg. So that's kind of a really interesting parallel to point out. And yeah, you're right. There's a lot of very specific tasks, especially as you get into like the rainforest ants. You can have hundreds of different castes, all with their own roles. And where the, I guess, comparison falls off is the Zerg I don't think do this, but because in fact with the Zerg you pull your hurt units back so they can heal. With things like ants, they actually put their injured and elderly units on the front lines because they have less intrinsic value.
Yeah, so I got a question for Destiny. Just in your personal opinion, why do you think the swarm host can only spawn Locust once it's burrowed? Like you cannot just walk and pop these eggs at the same time?
Man, I could tell you almost everything about the original StarCraft units because I actually read some of the books and all the lore and whatnot, but I couldn't tell you for Stormhouse. I can't tell you what the Blizzard reasoning is for it, and I can't think of why you would have to be underground to do it. I don't know.
Yeah, that really sounds like a question to ask Steve.
I could make like some really bullshit, like maybe like the force of expelling the Locust is so great that if it were to do it above ground, it would like slam it into the ground or fly back, so it has to be burrowed, and it uses its whole body as like it braces itself against the dirt. Just I don't know. That would be my guess.
Zappy, wouldn't that be scary? Just launching the eggs up in the air and then the locusts are born.
Spawn
Did you do
wherever
that with one of the upgrades
can-
in the campaign? You could like launch them over cliffs or something.
The first kind of spawn in the midair, but they have wings. That's how they stay in the air. I'm talking like shoot the egg and then it latches onto the unit.
What if they were banelings?
Oh, please, Blizzard, please.
Yeah, that would
whole
be
Hellion bullshit.
All right, Steve, is there any reason why they would use like the Locusts themselves, why they have acid as opposed to just like some sort of kinetic impact for a weapon?
presumably the reason is because it's a modified digestive system that has been since modified to harbor these things. And as we know, pretty much, I can't think of a digestive system that doesn't use some sort of acid. So it kind of makes sense that you'd have acid in that system if it is a hijacked digestive tract. And that's something that the Zerg kind of do well. They really hijack things. And actually that's, I should probably answer the point of why they don't shoot up the little babies, the locusts, as they walk. Basically in marsupials, all things, there's two concepts here that really ring true with the swarm host. They have something called superfetation, which is a really fun word, which means that a female can get knocked up twice at different times by even different males. So she can be, say, I don't know, 1 month pregnant and yeah, basically there are marsupial rodents that's a certain time of year, the males, all they do is hump. And then they hump till they die. They literally do not eat, do not sleep. They just go.
Man, that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, that would be
dedication.
I could be wrong, but are fruit flies similar to that? Don't they have like a super short lifespan of like
day?
Yeah.
Yeah. A good example would be something like mayflies, where they live like 1 to 2 years as the nymph, and then when they hatch out, they've got 24 hours, maybe 48 if they're a lucky species, and where they don't eat. All they do is just find a mate, do it, and die.
So wait, hold on, this might be a parallel that would explain why the Locust dies after 15 seconds or more if you have the upgrade. What exactly kills the mayfly or the fruit fly after that certain period?
They run
Starvation.
out of resources.
Also, they don't eat. They just are spawned with a certain amount of food in their stomach, and once that runs out, they starve to death.
Yep.
Yeah.
So maybe the Locust doesn't have a digestive system, it just has a sack of, I guess, food inside, and once that runs out... Yeah. It's
got a hijacked digestive system, so it's not really good for digestion, but it is good for storing these pokey bits and shooting them out at suspecting Marines, because you'd probably see them coming. It's not like they're popping out from anywhere. But
can we say that the upgrade just gives you fatter locusts then?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Bigger stomach sack or whatever.
Yeah, the ability to store more stuff, sure.
More energy efficient types of fat, perhaps.
And I guess with the idea of the Zerg spinning, you doing whatever they do with DNA to make things more efficient, I guess it makes sense to combine those two systems into one, the digestive system and, some kind of offensive system, since they're only out there for a few seconds anyway before they either die of lack of stuff or they're expelling the stuff that keeps them alive anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the thing, right? They're basically both cannon fodder and meant to do DPS, and then that's it. So once they've served their purpose, there's no point in scaling them up to try to get them to survive. But anyway, I really want to finish the point about them not popping babies. There's one more key thing called diapause. So basically, if you are a kangaroo and you are pregnant, you can pause your pregnancy. Like, let's say it's too warm out and you're having difficulty regulating or whatever, or there's no resources, or, you're under stress, for example. And that's the key thing. If you're under stress, you can diapause your pregnancy as a marsupial, which means that you sort of put it into stasis. And I think that's what it is for the swarm host, in that they're putting these little eggy things on hold. They're pausing them because the swarm host is
hold on, I gotta interrupt you. They don't actually put the eggs. They just kind of come out from the inside. They have a womb and they just emerge from the inside of the hole.
Well, they put them into diapause, is what I'm saying. So they basically put them into stasis and until they're in a place where they're not stressed, which would be underground. So I think that's kind of where you're seeing some of the limitations of how this I mean, evolution is a weird thing. You get all kinds of vestigial things. I mean, for example, in humans, we don't have a working vitamin C gene, so we have to take in vitamin C by eating fruit. Just the way it worked out, right? Our ancestors.
Don't we make? Am I mixing it up with like vitamin D or something? Maybe I thought that we produced a little bit of something when we get sunlight.
Yeah, vitamin D.
That's vitamin D. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, that's vitamin D. So, and that's UV. It's important for like if you live in the northern hemisphere, like up in Canada with me, you don't get as much vitamin D and end up getting osteoporosis and bad things happen. So I was thinking it would be really good to include your chat here. So why don't we get a few interested nerds in, and not in on the call, but just, you know, whoever has a question, throw it out on the chat. And I guess we'll leave it up to you, Destiny, to sort of pick them at random, and we can answer them for you guys before we start up a different type of unit.
Yeah, I remember when I was trying to type into his chat, it was so difficult. There was so much spam there.
Yeah, it's a little spammy, but I can, what do you want me to ask them? If they just have
just any question about, you know, the swarm host or the Zerg in general, since we're talking about it.
All right, do you want me to just read them off for you if I see any interesting questions? Or
Yeah, read them off.
This guy has a question. I guess there's not a good answer to this because of game mechanics, but he says, Destiny, how can swarm hosts operate in a way that doesn't violate the laws of thermodynamics?
I think he means that infinitely spawn locusts without doing anything. I think that's it.
That's one of those logical fallacies, and I don't mean to insult the guy, but when a good example would be if you saw the Ken Ham Bill Nye debate. I don't want to get into this too much, but it's common rhetoric for people who disagree with the concept of evolution to say it violates thermodynamics. But you have to realize that when you're a swarm host and you're on a planet, it's not necessarily a closed system. So they've got this great big back. Perhaps they're taking in some sort of energy from the sun, you know, not necessarily photosynthetic, but more like a reptile basking. And another way of looking at it would be that perhaps the swarm host itself, we don't get to see the end game for where you don't see any old swarm hosts. Nowhere in the game do you see any really old units in general, because the game doesn't actually last all that long. So it could very well be that these things spawn or hatch, or however you want to say it, with a limited set of resources. And as a result, once they run out of these resources via producing all of these locusts, they simply starve.
Or it could also
this could be something I could actually talk about too. For once. Another way that to elaborate basically on what Steve just said is for them to not violate the second law of thermodynamics is actually pretty easy. They could be taking in resources again from the sunlight, from the ground, from the creep. They could have very high energy or potential energy fat molecules, for instance. And then when they break these things down into their more elementary parts, you know, simple hydrocarbon combustion, things like that, you can get a lot of energy out. So it's not necessarily the case that they violate the laws of thermodynamics by spawning tons and tons of locusts. It's just that they're very, very efficient users of the energy that they have available to them. And that's a testament to the, you know, usefulness of the Zerg units.
Okay, another question. We have time for maybe two more, and then we'll switch to maybe Protoss.
Yeah.
A lot of these are having to do with sexual relations with swarm hosts. I don't think that's...
Well, Steve, our expert in sexual relations with strange animals, will...
Well, I mean, look at that ass.
Here we go. What are their thoughts on creep and the fact that it is essentially a superhighway for the Zerg transporting nutrients from skin creep contact? ?
Yes.
This is an interesting one, and actually my original sort of media manager basically was my video making slave named River, came up with this rather interesting idea. Well, I think it was her and I can't remember how it panned out, but River was involved. Basically what happened was we determined that the creep is basically poop. And if you look at nature, you actually see a lot of animals that function very, very well by eating just poop.
Take dogs, for example.
Yeah, dogs. It's like dogs friggin' love it. Well, there's a lot of insecty things that just love eating poop, and I assume like when a whale poops, that's a smorgasbord for a whole bunch of different animals. How they consume it, and so so basically how it works, I think, is that perhaps they might be eating it. There is some precedent, as you have suggested, for absorbing it through the skin. There's a lizard down in Australia. It's called the thorny devil. basically, its scientific name is Moloch horridus, so Moloch. If you want to Google that, basically they live in a really crazy desert environment, and one way in which they actually survive this environment is they can absorb water through their skin on the soles of their feet. So there is some precedent for your suggestion that they are absorbing creep. It really depends on a few things: how fluid creep is, what the outer surface of creep is, whether it's just like a waterbed that they kind of jump around on, or if it's like
a biological matter, like veins, sort of, so they can transport, let's say, from the center of the hatchery outwards.
I think it's more of just a big blob. And one thing I would really love for Blizzard to add in Legacy of the Void, and I wish they had done for this game, is have how they've got neutral creeps just kind of dicking around on the map. What if like say on ultra high settings, you had these little insecty creep maintenance dudes running around on some of the buildings maybe, or perhaps on the creep, and sort of flesh out the idea of what the creep actually is, because they're rather vague about it, to be honest.
So basically, you want to see infested critters.
Oh.
Like little broodlings, but microscopic scale.
Like little tiny things flopping around. So there is some precedent for that. Yeah.
Let's get one more question.
Yeah, one more question.
There's lots of how are units put into overlords and transported. That's kind of interesting. Are there any good examples of that besides kangaroos?
To sexual relations with Blizzard.
I would say when you turn 40, you'll probably understand it.
Wait, what?
Just the whole recommended colonoscopy at the age of 40.
Wait, are you transporting creatures around in there?
Yeah. Well, technically,
we try not to ask questions we don't want to know the answer to.
That's a good point. I don't know. I make a joke out of the Zerg repurposing their sphincters and their colons quite a bit. I mean, you have the queen doing it, the overlord, quote, pooping out the creep,
Mutalisk.
Yeah, the Mutalisk. That is actually the bum, I believe.
And you have that big one.
And another good example is the Overseer pooping out the little changeling, which is really neat. My friend River actually suggested that maybe the changeling is made of creep, so that's kind of cool.
Yeah, but I mean, my take on it, because I actually played a ladder, unlike you, who plays Dota all the time. Come on, man.
Boo.
Well, it's explained in the lore more or less that the overlords have a hollowed out carapace. That's what the upgrade is for the transport. And when you look at it, it's just a giant, like a dome kind of creature, kind of like a jellyfish, I guess. So
the upgrade is called ventral sacs.
No, that's for faster movement.
No, that's pneumatized carapace.
Oh, okay.
You've got them backwards.
Yeah.
Okay.
So ventral sacs suggests very much that there's just a giant colon that they're being carried in.
Well,
they look hollowed out. So
they kind of are. I mean, how do you think they achieve floating? They've got some sort of probably inert gas that is lighter than air, so maybe something like helium filling them.
Vespene.
Yeah, it could very well be Vespene. They've never really gone into detail about what the hell Vespene actually is, but for it to be lighter than air, especially,
we can see
it could be because it does float up out of the vents.
That's true. That's true. Oh, physics.
Well, in space, it's probably floating just due to it being warmer than vacuum. That's just, I mean, you can do that calculation pretty easily.
So,
wait, what?
Sorry, go ahead.
Right, so you can do ideal gas law equations, and you put an ideal gas into a vacuum, and it'll start dispersing out everywhere because there's no limit on the volume. Like a gas takes up whatever container it's in, so if the container is all of space, it will float up out into space.
It's a concentration gradient, high concentration to low concentration.
You don't even have to make it that complicated.
And so
what if an overlord was on a planet and all the gas on the planet was like hydrogen gas? Would the overlord just sink since nothing can be lighter than that?
Yeah, I think there'll be bigger problems.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I think I don't think that planet lasts too long.
Yeah, if you've got an atmosphere of hydrogen, you're probably going to end up with some sort of bad time.
I mean, let's be clear. Hydrogen's not going to react with itself, but if you're there putting out other gases, those gases could react with the hydrogen. So.
That's true. So I think the best answer to this question is it's very ambiguous, and we don't know if the overlords can in fact land. We've never actually seen anything like that.
Wait, no. There was the campaign mission where they're all frozen. Some of them are stuck to the ground. And then when you freeze it,
they don't technically
lift off.
land. They're trapped in the ice.
Yeah, that's.
But they are on the ground. Like they do make it safely to the ground and then back up again.
They could theoretically produce the gas needed and store it in their bodies, and then when they want to land, let some out, right? And then just make more when they have to take off again.
Yeah, it
Like,
makes
is that
sense because it doesn't cost you Vespene to make an overlord. It's just minerals, so maybe they synthesize it.
So maybe maybe it's like they produce helium. Maybe there's some helium in creep, and and they eat the creep or however they do it, and then they fart it out and they make a byproduct and utilize the byproduct.
I wonder what an Ultralisk would sound like on helium. I just want to throw that out.
Aren't there certain bacteria that produce hydrogen and other gases as a waste product?
Methane.
Oh, tons.
Okay, so I mean, like, is it possible then that the overlords have some of those on board to do this process?
Well, there's also another example that's maybe a little bit more familiar to some people. I don't know how many people know, but like in fish, for example, a lot of them actually regulate their height in the water column by basically having a swim bladder. So it's basically this gas-filled bladder, or in sharks it's filled with oil, and they kind of regulate it that way. And so basically, if you think about it, how many planets do we know of that have a atmosphere that is similar to Earth, or at least similar viscosity? At least one, right? And Mars is probably thinner, but like if you look at like Mercury and a lot of the gas planets as well, they have pretty damn thick environments.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
So it might not actually take a whole
Doesn't
hell of a
Mercury
lot.
like almost not have an atmosphere?
Is it Venus I'm thinking of? It's one of the two.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Venus. Venus has a thicker one.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, sorry. I don't do space stuff.
Well,
Space.
and that actually.
So, and of course, that idea comes to us from one of my main biology volunteers. His name is Gilgatine or Brutaxelos. Depends on what platform you catch him on. He's messaging me in the side, giving me some ideas here. So thank you, Eric. But yeah, basically, it depends on the thickness of the atmosphere. But as far as I know, you don't see a lot of bare-skinned Terrans. Like, have we ever had like I guess vultures? Did vultures have any kind of gas mask or anything on them?
I don't think so.
Say they did, maybe not. I don't remember which units do or don't.
I thought they had those little
they didn't
drops.
have gas masks. No.
Yeah, so clearly they're being deployed in an area where there's not, an unbreathable atmosphere. So perhaps that whole viscous atmosphere thing is thrown out the window.
I'm sure to some point when you get into as far in the future as they are, I'm sure that like the whole terraforming thing has been completely figured out too, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Well, presumably, though, you're not fighting on planets that have all been terraformed. I mean,
Maybe, yeah.
The Zerg aren't going to be nice enough to be like, all right, well, you terraformed that one, so we'll hang out there.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
but
don't know. They mentioned that the atmosphere is so hot it can burn a man alive, so they don't really give a fuck.
Yeah,
So vultures are just the manliest men in the Terran army because
The inside of the craft could also be pressurized and with an atmosphere that's
no, it's
contained
open. It's like a hover bike, actually.
Is it really?
Yeah,
the vultures were open cockpit, I think.
Wait, why don't you see the pilots ever then?
Graphics, I guess.
I know if you look at the unit portrait, you can see that it looks like they're riding a bike, but that's a good point. Why don't you see the
there's up close pictures actually, and you can see it's just Jim Raynor on a vulture. You can see like take out a gun like I can't think of a movie.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. I just googled vulture StarCraft, and yeah, that's definitely an open bike. Huh.
Yeah, so maybe they have like this little thing from Star Wars Episode 1, this little thing that let them breathe underwater, and they just let that sit in their throat. Blizzard, it really doesn't matter. I mean, they made Mutalisk flap its wings in space, so I don't think
that and a lot of sunscreen. It's going to be hot there. You're going to want to
exactly.
lather up.
Well, SCV thought of head because they have a little cap with a shape.
And that mustache. So
the mustache adds a lot of protection to the upper lip, from projectiles and whatnot.
So
it's very functional array, so they can pick out the best minerals.
See, there we go.
So why don't we ask the chat, since they've been good enough to give us some questions. I'm thinking what we could do is just ask you guys what unit, be it Zerg or Protoss, would you like to hear a little bit more about how it functions? Because we are fortunate enough in that Zappy has most of a physics degree done and is very knowledgeable about that stuff. So we can cover quite a few things. Give us some suggestions, chat. What are they throwing out at you, Destiny?
I'm looking for good questions.
Or just for a topic for the for another unit for us to discuss.
Well, if it's all
One of the things I've probably seen, it's not that sex related, I guess a little bit. People want to say, why did Kerrigan get heels when she transformed into a Zergy?
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh,
Zappy's
yes,
got this
the
one.
heels.
Okay, yes, I know exactly.
We actually covered
What?
that.
Oh no, I just know why the heels are off in the final scene of Heart of the Swarm. That's the only reason.
Either
Well,
that I
angles.
wanted.
share it with us. Tell us why.
All right. So in the final scene of Heart of the Swarm, I can't explain why she has heels that well before this, but in the final scene when she's floating away, she doesn't have heels. The reason for this is these heels are actually incredibly dense. Kerrigan herself is lighter than air, but thanks to the heels, she stays on the ground most of the time. But in the final scene, when she has to float away, she sheds the heels, kind of like a, cocoon or sandbags on the side of a hot air balloon, and just floats away. See? Everything
Yes.
makes sense now. It's all intentional. And you want to have your weights at the bottom of whatever you're trying to weigh down, right? Because it lowers the center of mass and makes it more stable, less likely to get knocked over. That's why they had to be heels and not like, a backpack.
Plus, they get to
So-
appeal to their youth.
This makes sense. No,
connection
it
with
has
hand.
nothing to do with that. It was purely practical. Don't be mean
So,
to Kerrigan.
and so one thing that we do as a group is we try to find, as comical as it might turn out to be, a reason for what we're seeing. And a lot of times with, say, the Protoss, like the High Templar Storm, for example, we try our very best not to say, well, it's bloody magic. Okay, yeah, I get it. There's some magic in the game, whatever. But we try to explain how it happens, or we just try to figure it out. And it's led to some really, I guess, awkward descriptions like you just encountered.
I think that was pretty spot on. That sounds very reasonable to me.
That's
Yeah,
why
we
she has
just try to justify the BS in sci-fi universes like Aliens, StarCraft, you guys name it. We'll
Can I throw a crazy thing out there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please don't.
So on the sexual side of things, I don't think it's necessarily incorrect to look at it that way, right? So typically women wear heels because it makes their rear end look nicer, right? The point of raising the
Yep.
heel and all of that makes it look nicer. And Zergs are kind of evolved to do their thing, right? Well, if Kerrigan spends most of Heart of the Swarm chasing after Jim Raynor, I mean, biologically, you would think that she'd want to be as sexually alluring as possible, hence the heels. But by the end of the game, when she's lost all interest in him, she can shed that because her only goal now is to destroy the universe, so she doesn't need the sexy aspect anymore. So through like the Zerg selective DNA, whatever, they edit that out, and then she drops them. How about that?
Which
Yeah,
shows
that's
how
good.
Zerg are adaptive, they gotta go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
She wants to look sexy, so she adapted to it.
Can you guys imagine that conversation with Abathur? Just how that went down.
heels to make her butt go up.
Well, just her being like,
Well, no,
okay,
no,
well,
just-
I like what you've done. I like what you've done with the bum and the thighs and stuff. But I think I need a little,
I need a new
I do
pair of
not
shoes.
I do not
Extreme Zerg
understand.
makeover.
this does not work. No, Abathur, you're not getting. I need a little boost. I do not compute or whatever, like in his voice. I could just imagine that repartee that goes on where she's trying to be almost, whimsical, like shy about it, and he's just like, I do not understand. These serve no purpose. That would be. I really wish that Blizzard would do
See,
stuff.
no, it's the ultimate couple arguing over the women wanting new shoes and the guy not wanting to, buy them, or in this case, make them.
Yeah, Kerrigan
It's
has a good,
essentially
she can just
that.
evolve new shoes. She doesn't have to buy them.
Huh.
Or maybe she
That
gets
actually-
evolution points.
That begs the question: does she have a wardrobe of shoes?
Oh, like a cocoon, maybe.
Does she have a wardrobe of shoes? Where would she keep it? I mean,
She's
she'd
a
have to keep it
woman
on the
still.
Leviathan, right? But she
She's got
has
both.
them at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm before she's on the Leviathan. So, where do they come from?
Well, she's got a whole swarm following her. I presume she's got an overlord for
Oh wait, no, she
props
doesn't.
and
She's
for,
got a
and
pack
for-
mule
I lied.
Zerg.
I actually completely lied. She doesn't have them at the beginning of Heart of the Swarm, does she? Because she's still like kind of a ghost then.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I completely lied.
Do you guys
I
remember?
apologize.
Did her model in Brood War have the heels?
You couldn't.
I don't think the model in Brood War was that detailed.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. It's been years since I played Brood War, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's this one pixel in a very bottom that may be a heel.
Okay.
Could also
fair enough.
just be her foot.
Yeah.
Okay, so did anyone from the chat yet suggest like maybe a toss unit that we can talk about, just so that we can satisfy,
Or Terrans, or really anything.
yeah, it doesn't even have to be It doesn't even have to be StarCraft, guys. Destiny is what are they saying on the channel or on the chat there?
I don't know. It's hard to pick out questions from all the troll shit.
You called it.
Welcome to Twitch, right?
People are saying archons.
Archons,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, Zappy and me had this thing going.
Archons
with our
are still more
plans.
Steve than they are me. Oh, yeah, that's right. No, they're trees. Oh my god. Okay, guys. Protoss are photosynthetic, right? This is just something that's in the lore. It's not something that I'm trying to make up.
I thought they said they were chemosynthetic.
Okay, whatever. They're not eating things, all right? They're getting energy from like the way plants do, all right? Plants have this sort of split life cycle, which I'm sure Steve will talk about more in a second, where you've got like half the life cycle when they're like 1N, like half the DNA, and then half the life cycle where it's 2N. And like in something like a tree, the 2N is the full tree, and then the 1N is the acorn or whatever, right? In the Protoss, the 1N is the Templar, the 2N is the Archon. That is it.
I think you've been smoking some crack.
No, I definitely had a good night's sleep before I came up with this idea, all right?
So when I get owned by a ladder, I get owned by a bunch of trees?
Well, okay. How about this?
I wouldn't surprise me.
Why don't we start with this? Destiny, what do you think is going on with the Archons in their formation and what the hell they are?
I think that's a question for In Control. He's a Zerg player.
In Control played Zerg and Brood War. I don't know how that relates, but
Yeah, he did. That's true.
Everybody tries a little bit random.
So what do you think, Destiny? What's going on with them?
I think it's harder to do with Protoss because Protoss are probably, I think Protoss are the most quote unquote magical race of StarCraft 2, where they get a lot of their energy from like crystals and shit. So it's hard to think. Whereas like Zerg, you can bullshit a lot around with like different biological purposes, and with Terrans, you can bullshit around with like physics things. But I mean, a lot of Protoss is straight up. We use the Cahedrian crystal to like fuse our bodies and blow shit up. It's a lot harder to think. I can't really think of two Templar coming together and forming some energetic being unless you've got like some controlled nuclear reaction going on between their bodies or something. I don't know.
I think
That's how I like to
essence fuses.
That's how I like to think of it when I'm with a girl. I like to think of it as a controlled nuclear reaction myself. So,
oh boy,
you lost me when I'm with a girl.
Oh yeah, fair enough. So I think it's one of those units that is really difficult to justify in any sort of scientific matter, because if you think about it, Dark Templar themselves are a bit of a challenge at times to figure out, and then High Templars. I don't think we've even looked at High Templars yet.
High Templar are tricky.
No, we did an episode on Dark Templar. We did not make an episode on High Templar just yet.
Well, why don't we get Zappy to tell us about how they do some of it, because you mentioned the Cahedrian crystals and all that. How does their technology work then, Zappy?
I mean, you're not the first person to ask me this, and this isn't the first time I'm going to admit that I don't know. On the other hand, we can look at a lot of what they do and say that, for instance, a lot of the High Templar tech is electromagnetic. Psystorm is a great example. It's, for all intents and purposes, it's a lightning storm. And there are some other ones too, like feedback, for instance, could very well be electromagnetic. If you think about feedbacking, say, a Raven. A Raven's going to be something that's probably going to have a fair bit of, its mana might just be batteries. So
what about feedbacking a Zerg unit?
Feedbacking a Zerg unit gets a little bit more tricky. I mean, I've tried to justify this with things like electric eels before, but to be honest, I just don't know enough about biology to say, okay, well, they could store up energy in this way, and
well, hold on a
then
second.
it could be unleashed on them.
Let's ask Bernard this. Doesn't like neural impulses for the axions and synapses, doesn't it use electrical signals?
Well, you mentioned the electric eel, and that's a really good thing. Basically, the way it works is as they move their muscles, they actually are capable of basically storing some of this electrical impulse. I can't remember, it's like 900 volts or it's pretty high anyway. It's enough to wreck a human, at least a large one. And I've actually seen these things up close. Basically, there's a whole group of South American fish. There's even one called the elephant nose fish that communicate using these electrical signals. So they actually will, like, if there's danger, they'll send out a certain electrical signal into the water, and then all of their buddies around them will be like, "Oh shit!"
But how do they store that electrical energy, though?
Yeah, is it consumable?
You could say something like Don't our like mitochondria store like a certain amount of ATP that you can exhaust via exercise or activity? So you could say they start to build up a lot of it before going to cast spells in battle. Maybe a High Templar like will forcefully convert that ATP into some kind of explosive energy that blows them up.
I think that's chemical energy, no?
Well, chemical energy.
I mean, yeah, it is. But Protoss, to be fair, Protoss uses a lot of like psionic stuff. You know, like it's not necessarily just EM. Like I want to say the description for psionic storm is something like tears apart the minds of opponents caught on the storm or whatever. You know.
Yeah.
So I mean, it could be like a little bit chemical, a little bit psionic. I mean,
how do you think a battery works? It's chemicals that turn into electricity. So you actually do get these anyway. The point is that you get a lot of these animals, some of these animals that can actually store up the energy that, like, if you move your muscles, any muscles right now, you're actually generating electricity doing that. Believe it or not. And so maybe they have a capacity to store this up. And there's actually, this is neat with the Kydarian amulet. There is oh gosh, what is the product? I was reading this about a month ago. There's a product out there that takes the energy from you just like walking and stores it up in some sort of battery, and then you can use that battery or something to, anyway, I'll have to remember what the product is called, but it could be that they've got this semi-permeable membrane on this thing, and the Kydarian amulet is how, in fact, they're storing some of their excess energy.
It could also be meant for channeling. I mean, the upgrade for extra energy is the Kydarian Crystal Amulet upgrade or something like that, so maybe they don't just use it for storage, but also to channel their psionic energy.
Yeah, it's a Kydarian amulet.
Oh, okay, but what does channel their psionic energy mean? Like, that phrase doesn't make sense.
Lets it focus, I guess. So they can use it in a different way.
Well, I mean, let's go back to something that Destiny said earlier. We were talking about different types of energy, how Zergs might have a lot of chemical potential energy stored up in ATP or whatnot. That's something that can still be exploited by a spell like Feedback. I mean, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly how it works, but the basic idea of it is you take whatever potential energy, be it an electric voltage potential in a battery or chemical potential in a large molecule like ATP, and you can set it off with enough of a
some kind of catalyst
starter
or
energy.
Yeah. Actually, and I'm starting to we're getting into like really heavy Parasite Eve territory here. I don't know if any of you ever play that game.
No, I'd love to hear about it though.
Well, basically,
unit. Yeah.
Basically, that was the idea of that. The main monster there is that she could control people's like mitochondrias. So that would be like her way of killing opponents. Is she would force the mitochondrias to like go overtime in producing ATP, and then it would like set people on fire and shit. So maybe Feedback could work on a similar principle, except they can't force them to produce ATP. But if they have produced it, it can just break it apart forcibly rather than letting the unit, utilize it whatever way that they want to.
Right, so there's a big difference between...
Can I just throw a quick question? We have to consider also the conductivity and how these electrical impulses are moving between two media, especially when it's not in water. So if it's going through the air or whatever, just something to consider as we're talking. But go ahead, Zappy.
Right, well, what I was going to say is just... that if you do have ATP like that, there's a big difference between the body breaking it down at whatever rate that it wants to move your arms around or whatever you're doing, and it like all breaking down into carbon dioxide and water all at once. So if you just control the speed of you don't even have to. Well, you just have to control the rate of the reaction. If you can speed it up enough, you can generate a lot of heat, and if you generate enough heat, you're going to light things on fire. So the trick is controlling the rate of the reaction of the ATP. I don't know exactly how you do that, but if you could, you'd be a rich guy. Or
there are some natural mitochondrial disorders that I've actually met somebody with one, and basically they had trouble keeping weight on. I think what it was they weren't producing proper amounts of ATP, and just the way that works. You lose ATP at quite an alarming rate if you're not able to consistently generate it. It's not a very stable molecule. I mean, it's not the most unstable volatile thing I can think of, but it's not, the most stable thing on the planet, and it's meant to be used, and indeed it does get used quite often. So it could be just a matter of something subtle where it's not like necessarily making them go super into overdrive, but it could just be buggering up 50% of their production.
Well, I
And
got
then-
a bit of a hypothesis. We're talking about ATP and things like that. When you look at the units that, for Zerg at least, that have energy, you see like eggs. I mean, the things produced by energy from the Zerg units. You got eggs, creep tumors, changelings, and that thing from Contaminate, whatever that is. It's got a big blob. You know, could it be rather than go from ATP? Maybe those are just the most fragile things, and small electric discharge would be just enough to kill it. Like if you're trying to feed back an Ultralisk or I don't know, just any larger unit, you know, that little jolt will just you know, disturb it a little bit. But if you do it to something small like a changeling or a creep tumor while it's in its infant stage, could that be enough to just you know, altogether kill it or disrupt its, you know?
I think you're thinking about this backwards. You're thinking about the things that are getting feedbacked as being very weak, and the things that can't be feedbacked as very strong. I want you to think about it the other way, where things that you can't feedback, like an Ultralisk, doesn't have as much potential energy stored up as something like a Queen or an Infestor that would have a lot more potential energy, just huge orders of magnitude larger amounts of potential energy than something that you can't feedback.
And even taking that a step further, not just the amount of potential energy, but maybe the amount of potential energy per like volume of creature, or per like amount of muscle it has, right? So like an Ultralisk might have as much potential energy as an Infestor, but the Ultralisk is utilizing all of that energy through moving its massive body. So even though it has the same amount of energy, it's a fucking massive creature that is constantly using it through its muscles, whereas an Infestor isn't that massive and it doesn't do much besides slither around. So even though it might have the same amount of energy, it's storing up massive reserves so that it can spit out High Templars or fungal growths.
So it's more dense. It's not that it has less; it's just more dense.
Yeah. It's the density, and it's the fact that a lot more of it, I guess, would be in units that store energy. There's a lot more potential energy there because it's just sitting in a reserve.
Well, yeah, think about it this way. Most units that are casters are dedicated caster units. There are a couple exceptions, like Ghosts, notably, but for the most part, think of the Infestor. It's big, it's fat, it's unwieldy, it's
can't attack.
basically a giant biological battery. Whereas something like an Ultralisk has, you know, large amounts of muscle and armor and big weapons and whatnot else. So it, you know, Infestor, all energy, you blow it up and you take out the energy, there's nothing left. Ultralisk, you try to feed back it, you're going to get rid of a little energy and there's still going to be a lot left over.
So they can be feedback, it's just not viable because you would like take off what, like 5 HP.
So yeah, exactly,
I mean, in theory, yeah.
So I got a question here. If you were to ask, say, Blizzard, and I'm talking to Destiny directly here, if you were to ask Blizzard one question about how one unit design functionality, like we've been talking about, how it works, what would it be?
I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe how the mothership cloaks everything beneath it.
I got a better one. If you could ask Blizzard to make one unit to just fix the ladder, or you know, just make the game more interesting. There we go.
Well, that's balance wise. But I actually, before, I mean, because we've been going for about an hour now. Before we, I guess, call it a day. Quickly answer maybe why, Zappy. I think you're probably best suited to this. Why or how does it accomplish this cloaking field?
So I've tried to grapple with cloaking before, obviously. All right. So for something the size of a mothership, and you're not cloaking the mothership proper, right? You're only cloaking the things underneath it.
Yeah.
It's a giant arbiter in that respect.
Except worse.
What you really want to do is divert the light around it. So you see things by having light bounce off of them or be emitted from them, and it hits your eyes, and boom, you see it, right? What you want to do when you're cloaking something, especially that big, is you want to bend the light around it so that light that's coming from behind it will divert around off of the object you're trying to cloak and then go off to wherever. And that would be the cause of the that you see. It's the little shimmer when the DT walks into your base or whatever.
Yeah, and we did cover it in a Dark Templar episode on our channel as well. So if you want, for the fans listening, if you want more detail on it, we explained it more or less. We also mentioned the plans for the archons there as well. Yeah, and I'm going to say the same thing here that I said there. I don't know exactly how you do that. There are a number of ways I'm not going to go into, but again, if I could do it, I'd be a very rich man. I'm not.
Okay, so we'll.
I think I think it's possible to describe cloaking with the laws of physics, right? It's just like infeasible to actually like execute it in real time, right?
Right. So, like one of the ways that we talked about was you could use gravity to try to bend the light. I mean, I'm not going to go into general relativity about bending light with gravity, but basically you can. The problem is then that to generate that much gravity, you have to have a very, very large amount of mass or equivalent amounts of energy. And carrying around that much mass has a lot of problems in and of itself. You know, hey, all of the rocks and my gun are being pulled towards that spot. Gee, I wonder if there's something there.
Sure.
All right, so we're running 58 or somewhere about there minutes in. So
yeah, let's call it a day. But tell them where they can find out more info, Hades, and more and volunteer if they're so inclined. If they feel, hey, I have got some great insight to this stuff.
oh yeah, definitely. Check us out on aosf.boards.net. If you want to request any topics, just talk around about the episodes that we had so far, or if you just want to troll us, either way, we're fine with that.
So thanks for listening, guys, and I really do mean it. If you feel that we were full of shit, or if you feel that you have something to contribute, I really strongly encourage you to come in and help make this better. Because ultimately, we're not saying we're the be all and end all. We're having a starting off point and seeing what shakes out. So,
just a shout out, Destiny. If you ever want to come on our show, our arms are open. We would love to have you on again.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, back to gaming, I guess. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. Good luck, guys.
Yep. Thank you. Take care.